All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us again for this next segment of the 2026 Cooperative Identity and Energizing the Cooperative Brand International Symposium. We appreciate you being here with us today. I'm Erin Hancock. I head up education with the International Center for Co-op Management. We're out of the business school at St. Mary's University. And myself, as well as Tammy, both with ICCM at the front of our names here in Zoom, will be your support today if you have any questions about the programming. We've got the information on translation in the chat. I'll give folks one moment to click that link to get your translation set up so we don't leave anyone behind. Great. If you'd like to, you can rename yourself in Zoom so we see which organization and which country you're coming in from. And feel free to use the chat throughout to introduce yourself, to add a comment, a question, or to link something from your own organization or your own experience that you want others here to see. This is a shared space for connection. Things are set up as a Zoom meeting, so you can see other folks, you can connect with them directly in the chat, and we can share with each other. We're going to use the same Zoom link all week. You can come and go as you wish. We will record and post the recordings after the event. I want to say a big thank you to our co-organizers and co-sponsors, to .coop, as well as the Northwest Cooperative Development Center, and also to Co-ops and Mutuals Canada for supporting the event and for providing the translation, allowing more folks to join in with us today. I want to say a big gratitude to our Indigenous people of these lands and the elders past and present, the Mi'kmaq people who steward the lands here and the waterways here on the east coast of Canada. We're located in Halifax, Nova Scotia, also known as Chibuktuk, the Great Harbor. I want to thank you to all the speakers and for all of you folks attending and adding to the conversation. Please consider this to be your event as well. We do look forward to your questions and comments. You'll see information that we'll send out later, and I'll drop some links into the chat as well. But just to say, us as hosts, the International Center for Cooperative Management, we have programming to elevate co-ops and credit unions and management and governance worldwide. For everything from 1-hour sessions to 3-year master of management programs in co-op and credit union management. So just wanted to flag to folks, there's a lot of free and open resources and events available to you, as well as some programming certifications and degrees. And we're proud to be the stewards of this today. And the center's been operating since 2003. Just so you have a good sense, we've got a great event lined up for you. Over 40 speakers from 11 countries. Even more countries represented in those who are participating. We've got 25 workshops and presentations over the 4 days. We did start last week with our pre-symposium workshop, and we have around 400 people registered. I won't get too deep into the themes, but you'll see these woven throughout the sessions and the presentations, and you can go to the website for the event to see more detail on those themes, as well as on our goals of bringing people together, elevating our work, making co-ops and credit unions more of a choice, an automatic choice, a well-known, respected, and trusted choice for more people, reinforcing loyalty with current members and reaching out to new audiences as well. So thank you for being part of that this week. Just to highlight, we do have things happening the rest of the day, as well as tomorrow and Thursday. All of these details are in the program. Do check the time zones, and we'll link the program in the chat as well. If anybody has any questions about programming, Tammy and myself both have ICCM in our name. You can send a direct message to us. If you have any issues with translation, we've got folks from CMC here in the chat as well. They'll have Wordly in their name, which is the name of the translation device we're using. And otherwise, we will jump right into things. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. And over to Karen Miner, who's moderating this next section.
Thank you, Erin. I'm Karen Miner. I'm the Managing Director at the International Center for Cooperative Management at St. Mary's University. And like my fellow panelists, session, we all may wear many hats. So when we even just give ourselves one label, we know that there's many more that go with that. And so I would encourage you all to read the longer bios of those presenting and keep that in mind as we hopefully get more interconnected as a result of these days together and hear about the many layers to each of our respective journeys in the cooperative sector. For me, it's been the last 20 years and lots of different organizational affiliations. And I'm excited to be in this session with 4 folks that I would say I've also traveled the windy path in cooperative land, have done many things, have been part of many organizations. So hopefully they'll touch on that a little bit when they talk about themselves in their sessions. I will just name the exciting titles and the individuals presenting them, and then we'll dive in. So we have 4 presentations. This is a presentation session. It's not a panel, and it's not though something where we have to only focus on each of the individuals. So think about the overlaps and interconnected pieces as you listen to the 4. We will have conversation at the end. We will open it for your questions and comments, and please do be active in the chat with your thoughts throughout. But we will reserve the majority of the questions for the end after the 4 presentations, which will each be about 20 minutes in length. So we will be in a few minutes, starting with Lisa Zentner, whose affiliation listed here is Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada, an organization being a cooperator located in Canada I am very familiar with, and just finishing my last month on its board of directors after spending 9 years on that board. So excited to have Lisa here, and the title sounds irresistible. It is From Invisible to Irresistible, Marketing the Cooperative Advantage Through a National Identity System. Then we will move on to Julia Martins Rodriguez, research associate at the University of Colorado Boulder. However, she also used to be a researcher with the International Center as well as instructor. So I know Julia well. I'm excited to spend some time with her, presenting on spreading the word, media and public awareness through Colorado's co-op networks. Then we will move on to Lucas Badu, who is representing a very well-known organization, Apex organization, in a very large cooperative ecosystem. That's the Organization of Brazilian Cooperatives, or OCB. So thrilled to be able to hear more about Somos Co-op, promoting co-op identity through shared branding. And last but not least, we have Jason Weiner, founder of Jason Weiner PC, and very engaged in many things as well. The presentation today will focus on ownership structures and identity structures, cooperatives as critical institutions for today's economy. So this will be an exciting 2 hours. Look forward to the conversation. And I will start by handing the microphone and the podium over to Lisa Zentner to kick us off.
Great. Thank you, Karen, and just want to check that you can see my screen.
Yes, all good.
Okay, do you see the title slide? I'm not sure if it's sharing the right slide. So
it was showing the title slide.
It was. Let's go back there. Okay. All right. You can see the title slide?
Yes.
Great. Okay, thank you. Thanks for your help. Great to be with you. I'm Lisa Zentner, Director of Communications at Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada, or CMC, as you may hear me say. Today I'm sharing a practical case study from Canada on how a unified national co-op mark and a QR-enabled marketing label could help turn cooperative values into something people can recognize, understand, and choose in everyday life. So this is about building a scalable identity system and a tool set that makes cooperatives visible at the point of choice. So I'm going to walk you through 3 things: what the public mood looks like in Canada right now, grounded in public opinion research, why visibility is the constraint even when trust in cooperatives is high, and what a practical identity system can look like, including co-branding and a QR label. So I'll move to the next slide. So to set the stage, I'll start with what Canadians are feeling right now and why that makes visibility more important than ever. So what we're seeing is not just economic pressure, it's a shift in how Canadians make decisions. So many of the systems people relied on, affordability, institutions, global stability, feels less predictable. So as a result, people are reevaluating everyday choices, where they spend, who they trust, what feels safe and reliable. So in that environment, people don't want innovation or disruption. They're actively seeking anchors, stability, predictability, institutions they trust. And more importantly, they want these things to feel local, visible, understandable. That's exactly what the cooperative model already offers. So the key insight is that cooperatives are structurally aligned with what Canadians are looking for right now. But unfortunately, alignment alone is not enough. The opportunity and the problem becomes clear through these three contexts. So the Canadian context, where public demand is moving towards stability, trust, and local control. CMC's own organizational context, where our members and leaders are asking for greater awareness, clearer identity. And the global context, where the cooperative movement is fragmented, which limits recognition and scale. So growth is the objective, but when you put these three contexts together, the insight is that visibility is the constraint. So I'll now dive into these three contexts. So let me start with the Canadian context. So in partnership with the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada, we commissioned in November 2025 Abacus Data, who's a Canadian public opinion and research firm. They surveyed a statistically significant and representative sample of Canadians to understand three things. The first, Canadians' sense of control and stability. The second, trust in institutions. And the third, perceptions of cooperatives. There's a clear shift from March of this year as compared to July 2024 about what's weighing on Canadians' minds. So from this question, what is keeping you up at night? We can see that in addition to inflation, cost of living, and housing, global concerns have been added, including war, Iran, Trump, trade. Canadians are unsettled, and they're looking for actions that will make a real difference. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So this is where this is a framework that shows human priorities from basic survival needs at the bottom up to the top, which is belonging, self-esteem. Canadians feel like they're living in instability, so at the bottom of the pyramid. So their priorities shift from aspiration at the top down to security and stability and control. The result is a growing sense of precarity that forms the lens through which Canadians evaluate everything in their lives, from finances to institutions. So in scarcity, people worry about essentials, rent, groceries, daily costs. But in precarity, the worry runs deeper. People feel that systems that once made life predictable, the economy, housing, geopolitics, are less stable than before, and the ground feels like it's shifting under them. This mindset's reinforced by cost of living pressures, and it influences who they trust and what choices they make. The key findings from the research were that Canadians want stability, not disruption. Cooperatives put Canadians back in control, something that many feel that they've lost. And 3, Canadians want more cooperatives, meaning they want to become members. This national research that we did shows that Canadians are connecting today's economic realities with cooperatives as practical solutions in their ability to stabilize communities during economic ups and downs and survive tough times. And this is where cooperatives become incredibly relevant, not just in Canada, but globally. In uncertain conditions, uncertain environments, people look for institutions that are trustworthy, local, and accountable. And cooperatives already meet that need. The challenge facing cooperatives is not trust, and it's not perception. The research found that Canadians do trust in the cooperative model and are aligned with what they want more of, which is fairness, control, and resilience. But the research also showed that cooperatives are largely invisible. They blend in. The challenge then is visibility, because if people can't recognize a cooperative in the moment they're making a choice, that desire can never translate into action. Let's look at CMC's organizational context. So we're in the middle of our 2025-2028 strategic plan. At the end of last year, we did a consultative survey with our members where senior leaders asked CMC for greater public awareness of cooperatives, a national campaign, a unified brand identity, more coordinated visibility. So awareness and growth are the top priorities for us. And our central objective is to grow cooperative market share and influence. But that growth depends on one simple condition. Canadians need to know what a co-op is and be able to recognize one when they see it. The research study we did tells us that only 7% of Canadians say they are very familiar with the cooperative model. That's extremely low, and that's a strategic risk. Our plan also calls for more awareness, stronger policy influence, and a more aligned ecosystem. And clarity is the prerequisite to that. A unified identity like the one I'm going to show you today is something that we're exploring as part of a rebrand initiative. And it's one of the most powerful tools we could use to build a national campaign to grow market share. So this isn't about design work. This is strategic infrastructure. The last context I'll share with you is the global context, because there's opportunity for synergy, which could multiply impact. So the co-op logo that we use today in Canada is based on ICA's interlocking O co-op logo, was launched in 2013. It was created through a thoughtful global consultation involving over 1,000 people from 86 countries. It's a solid, well-tested symbol that took language, culture, and design into account. That's why so many national bodies, including CMC, adopted it. Within ICA's global branding framework, we hope that there's an opportunity to build a unified brand identity. Jeroen Douglas, the Director General at ICA, who was mentioned at the beginning of our sessions today, he is speaking in a keynote panel about strengthening cooperative identity. So that talk is tomorrow. I highly encourage you to attend. He spoke at CMC's Canadian Congress in June of last year and shared amongst many things his vision for a unified global marque to drive more awareness and growth of cooperatives. That vision and intention could lead to great global synergy and alignment. So with these three contexts, we understand that public demand in Canada is shifting towards stability, trust, and local control. Cooperatives already match that need. Our co-op leaders are calling for coordinated action, more awareness, and a shared identity. And globally, despite fragmentation, there is the opportunity for impact and scale to build a strong global cooperative ecosystem. So the takeaway here is cooperatives don't lack relevance, they lack recognition. And because people choose what they can see and understand, visibility becomes the bridge between cooperative values and everyday decisions. So if visibility is the goal, clarity is the prerequisite. We need a clear, consistent way to show up so co-ops are instantly recognizable wherever people encounter them, in their communities, at point of sale, etc. So let me show you what I think clarity could look like. So we did an audit and analysis of our name and our logo to see if they met these conditions for clarity. So our current formal name is Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada. So we represent all cooperatives, mutuals, cases, credit unions in Canada, but with different sectors and different cooperative enterprises, it's hard to create that clarity and that uniformity. Our current informal name is CMC, which we call ourselves 99% of the time. That acronym has no inherent meaning to anyone outside our organization. And when you Google CMC, it points to results ranging from a chemical compound to a football player, none of which have anything to do with cooperatives. Our current logo uses multiple variations different colors, languages, different order and structure. So when you're trying to build national recognition, multiple inconsistent logos dilute clarity and signal confusion. The formal name we're exploring is Canada Co-operative Business Association. So that aligns with our national context and connects Canadians directly to cooperatives as a solution for the economic pressures they're facing today. It also reinforces that cooperatives are credible profit-generating enterprises and signals that we're a serious business model committed to commercial success and economic impact. A proposed informal name of Canada Co-op is derived from the longer formal name. It is not an acronym, and it's more instantly recognizable as to who we are and what we do. This proposed logo communicates several important elements in a clean and direct way. So the color red is associated with our Canadian maple leaf and our red and white flag. The CA is the two-letter ISO country code for Canada, which is an international coding system that is recognized globally. And the co-op word marque with the interlocking O's represents partnership, shared purpose, and strength of cooperation. So compared to what we have today, what is proposed is simple, recognizable, and instantly communicates Canada Co-op. Along with our .coop website, which is considered one of the strongest domain names in the global cooperative movement, we're able to leverage global equity while providing the clarity we need domestically. So the name, website, and logo now become a clean and intuitive identity system that aligns perfectly because our name, domain, and logo match. And when you Google Canada Co-op, the results point almost exclusively to cooperatives. So from a strategic standpoint, the alignment that is this identity system strengthens public awareness and improves digital discoverability. It's a simple shift, but it has significant impact. So if we were to move toward a logo like this, we're responding to the Canadian national context that demands more cooperatives and better visibility, as well as to our own strategic plan of awareness and growth of cooperatives. But this could also help position cooperatives as part of a more unified global cooperative marque. So like the Canada Co-op logo on the left, other countries could adopt a similar approach. The concepts you see on the right use the two-letter ISO country code, which would be a unique identifier by country. Colors could be customized per country according to the UN SDG color palette. This could give us an opportunity for synergy across the entire global cooperative ecosystem. So I'd love to tell you that refreshing a logo, name, and website of CMC is all we need to do to drive awareness. Yes, those pieces give us clarity and consistency and make cooperatives more understandable, but they alone don't create visibility. So because people can't choose what they can't see, right now we know cooperatives are too invisible, and that is a challenge. So if we were to move to a logo like this, how could we use it to drive awareness? So by using the logo to co-brand with individual cooperative brands, we could put it into places that people are already at, like point of sale mechanisms, on signage, or on community touchpoints. The key is to create repeated visible cues in everyday settings to build familiarity and trust over time to make cooperatives recognizable and relatable. When our largest co-ops use the Canada Co-op marque alongside their brand, it instantly signals to Canadians that they are part of the co-op ecosystem. The addition of the Canada Co-op logo isn't meant to replace individual identities, it's meant to reinforce them. And this is how cooperatives can show up more visibly in everyday lives. And more crucially, it helps people make the connection between brand and co-op that many are currently missing. We could use the Canada Co-op marque and co-brand on products that Canadians already buy and trust to connect co-ops to everyday purchases. So it takes an unfamiliar concept and it makes it familiar. And in this way, The Canada Co-op logo could function like a trusted third-party endorsement, similar to Fair Trade or the Canadian Organic Trade Association marque, helping Canadians quickly recognize that that cooperative brand is rooted in cooperative values. That familiarity, connecting brands and co-ops, is what ultimately drives awareness and growth. Growth happens because Canadians see cooperatives when they shop, on the products they buy, on the websites they frequent, recognize them, understand what they offer, and prefer them. So how do we take co-branding even further to turn visibility into choice and drive growth? We incorporate the Canada Co-op logo into a marketing label that works across sectors and touchpoints, packaging, storefronts, community spaces. It makes cooperatives visible in places where Canadians already are and meets people where they're at. The QR element that you see in the marketing label creates the bridge. So someone sees the marque, they scan it, they learn. That learning moment turns into engagement and choice. And that repeated choice across cooperative products, services, and sectors is what creates growth and scale. One of the strongest findings from the national research we did is that Canadians would generally choose a local co-op over a large corporate chain if they could identify one. So let's take that marketing label one step further, beyond packaging, and put it onto storefronts. The kind of tool like this, it's an excellent way to build broad everyday awareness. It makes cooperatives visible in places where Canadians already are. A marketing vehicle like this can identify for a Canadian at their moment of choice, this is a co-op, this aligns with my values, this is a good choice. Every co-op, from large institutions to small businesses like this one, could display the marketing label to clearly connect their brand with cooperative values. And it can be visible in the store, not only at the cash, but on store shelves, at the product level. We can go even further to transform co-op market share. Like the merchandising program that was created for Fair Trade, co-ops have a similar potential. A consistent identity, a co-branding logo, a marketing label, a merchandising program. These are all ways that could present co-ops to citizens and scale growth in a way that it currently does not. Brands grow and communities echo them. So if Canadians see the Canada Co-op logo on campuses, in workplaces, like in fair trade towns, like the one I live in St. Anne de Bellevue, it becomes part of everyday public consciousness. So up to this point, I've shown you 3 contexts and an identity system that responds to those contexts. So I think we can agree that our communication strategy for making cooperatives visible is what's most important. So we need to focus on what people are experiencing right now and put our co-ops into that context. We have to connect co-ops to real life and meet people where they already are. We have to be clear with how we translate our cooperative values. They need to be within context, simple, and on point. And something like a co-branding label, a co-branding logo, and a marketing label that can connect co-ops to real life, and they can do that quickly, consistently, and at scale. Meeting people where they're at means meeting them at the bottom of the pyramid to address their needs, not at the top. So our challenge is not about the performance of cooperatives. Co-ops are seen as trustworthy, accountable, and financially sound. The challenge and the opportunity is to help Canadians and the people in your countries choose cooperatives, to see them as relevant and important to the challenges of today, especially from an economic perspective. And ultimately, this is the shift. We move from telling people what cooperatives are to helping them see cooperatives, recognize them, and choose them. So what are next steps for us in Canada? We're continuing consultations on the proposed name and logo that I've shown you, that identity system. until the end of May. If successful, we move ahead over the summer in building our brand assets, where we would soft launch those assets in September and hard launch them for Co-op Week in October. We'd love to collaborate with you. What I've shown you today is where we're starting, but its potential strength comes from using it collectively across the entire movement. What will work in Canada may not look exactly the same somewhere else, but the principle of making cooperatives visible at the moment of choice is universal. So I'd really encourage you to think about, what would this need to look like in your community and in your country? What would you be willing to adopt or test? And how could we begin to align, not perfectly, but meaningfully? And if you're interested in any of what I've shown you today, please send me an email. I'd love to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Well, and I think this panel will have more on a similar theme as we move over to Brazil in a couple of presenters, since it has some overlap with some similar ideas. But yes, I appreciate seeing this presentation almost again, because as a board member with Co-operative Mutual Canada, I've had the pleasure of having Lisa present some of the earlier versions. And so it's great to also have it as part of the symposium today. Please do react in the chat as these presentations go on, and also add any specific questions, and we will loop back to them. I'm going to resist right now asking any questions that might spring to mind for me, as I also want to hear what the other presenters have to say. So next we have Julia, and the title again is Spreading the Word, Media and Public Awareness Through Colorado's Co-op Networks. But Julia is also a global cooperator, so has lots of context and experience to draw on in the work that she does. So thank you, Julia, for being part of this. Over to you.
My pleasure. It's always nice to be back at the ICCM. This is a presentation on building a cultural movement in a very early stage project that we're incubating here in Colorado. And so it's less about the deliverables and the results of this process, but more about the framework we are adopting and how we want to wave this into the broader co-op movement. And just a few things about me. I'm the vice chair of the Employee Ownership Commission here in Colorado at the Office of Economic Development and International Trade. I'm the associate director at the Media Economies Design Lab at University of Colorado Boulder, and former research associate here at ICCM. I'm from Brazil, currently based in Boulder, Colorado, USA, and here's my contact. And our lab at the university is focused on experimenting with democratic ownership and governance, mostly in the online economy, though we are taking steps to bring a broader frame to offline experiments as well. And we are currently housed by the College of Communication, Media, Design, and Information. This will be relevant as we move forward. And for a little bit of context, Colorado has developed this leadership in community ownership, especially in employee ownership, very focused on worker co-ops. We have a commission since 2019. Jason Weiner, our panelist today, is a fellow commissioner and one of the early commissioners that really played a paramount role in putting this infrastructure together and help strengthening this process. So from this commission, now we have the first and only statutory public office in the United States that's fully dedicated to employee ownership, which includes not only worker co-ops, but also ESOPs, employee-owned trusts, and other alternative equity structures. Colorado is also a state with a really co-op-friendly legislation, and this very intentional effort to bring and help converting companies, especially in this day and age where most business owners in the area, and I think it's a pretty general phenomenon, are baby boomers, are business owners, they're ready to retire or near retirement age. And with that comes that question of what's going to happen when they decide to retire, and maybe their kids are not ready to step up, maybe they're not buyers lined up to acquire those companies. So part of this, the reason of putting this infrastructure together is to help local businesses convert into worker co-ops or other employee-owned models in a very intentional effort. And we have many examples of those organizations here. Namaste Solar is a very large worker co-op. We have Alpine Bank, which is employee-owned through an ESOP. We launched a couple years ago, the Drivers Co-op, which is a social co-op owned by the drivers as an alternative to Uber and Lyft. And in this process, we realized there's still a very critical gap in terms of public awareness that remains very low. And despite all the groundbreaking policy infrastructure, business owners, workers, communities remain largely unaware of those models. And currently we don't have any sustained institutional capacity to translate that policy innovation into a cultural movement. And the frame here as cultural movement comes from this perception that co-ops, community ownership they are a very robust historical movement, an intellectual movement, an economic movement, even a political movement, but has yet to manifest as a cultural movement in the sense that people connect and are aware of it and know well what those things translate into practice. And last year, during the October 2025 employee ownership celebration with Governor Jared Polis, there was a roundtable on public awareness highlighting the need for further development on that front. And after that, the Employee Ownership Commission developed a strategic plan highlighting advertising and public awareness as one of the top priorities. But, because of lack of dedicated budget, internal capacity has been a constant barrier in developing a wide-reaching campaign in-house. And that's where it comes, this intersection. Well, Colorado also hosts a really vibrant academic innovation hub and also a very vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystem. And with that came the idea of leveraging the relationship, the collaboration between public universities and local governments to bridge research and real-world community needs. So in collaboration with the state office, MedLab is incubating a media project that is designed around cultural movement building and storytelling to grow awareness around co-ops, local economic development, community wealth building, economic democracy, and other forms of community ownership. And just to clarify the framework as of now, we're working with the lens of community ownership instead of co-op only or employee ownership only, because we realize that if we worked with only employee ownership, we would be excluding other forms of co-op models. They're owned by its users, producers, multi-stakeholder co-ops. But if we were to use only co-ops, we would be excluding other forms of employee ownership. That is the framework of our state office. They're not necessarily co-ops. So as of now, we're working with a broader community ownership lens, but co-ops are at the very, very front and the highlight of this project. And to do that, we are trying to create synergies with the resources we have. And the fact that MedLab is housed at the College of Communication, Media Design and Information, CMDI, which is a local media powerhouse that is designed to, bring innovative lens to communication, to instill creativity among young generations, and which became a very important component of this project, is to engage students. They're mostly Gen Zers, and bring this language and those concepts into younger generations that still remain largely unaware of these models in the mainstream culture. So the idea is to translate those academic concepts, economic concepts into accessible media, storytelling, visual art to a diverse audience with special attention to those younger generations. And our approach is to build, visual art design, strategic social media presence. And this is a project designed to be student-led, mentored by experts. So students will be engaged in building content, but with the guidance of faculty and practitioners. And so we can bring authentic voices that resonate across generations with fresh perspectives on communication, and bring co-ops and community ownership into the mainstream through a cohesive, well-thought social media strategy that meets people where they are. And I resonate with an early slide from Lisa when she mentioned belonging. And I think this is a key word here, is to instill this sense of belonging across different generations, that this is a movement for them, by them, and how we can connect with people where they are. That's a part of why I thought Lisa's presentation was so brilliant, of meeting people where they are and bring that sense of belonging. And so we're in early phases of this project. Right now we're sparking collaborations, not just between the university and the state office, but we're also, we're leveraging the Employee Ownership Commission's leadership and other employee ownership models. We're designing this in a way that we're building these collaborations with commissioners to mentor students in their respective areas. We have a number of commissioners, also partner organizations that will be, and local governments that will assign a mentor to a group of students to be working on messaging. And so we can develop this media framework for ever-changing multi-screen world that communicate those concepts widely. And one of our key collaborations is with the Brand Studios from the University of Colorado that belongs to the Department of Advertising and Public Relations. And they will be partnering in helping us build that visual identity. And as we're going to be partnering with them, and during the summer, we have a group of 3 master's students that will be working on the visual identity of this campaign, following a workshop led by me to guide them through key concepts. And then we will be going to phase 3, which is building the content pipeline for social media content. We have several partnerships across CU faculty members that will be integrating this project into social media courses, both at undergrad and master's levels. And like I mentioned, the commissioners and other partners will be mentoring students across different sectors: rural economic development, finance, law, entertainment industry, and other relevant sectors in our region. And these assignments will become ready-to-use campaign content. We're also building a separate cohort of students that will give continuity to this project. Through those experiments in class, we'll be able to identify talent and people that resonates with this campaign, and have a dedicated cohort of students outside of the classwork that will be continuing to create content. And so our big question here, and that's why I was so keen and interested in participating in this symposium, is how to bring this local project into the broader movement. How might we align this media campaign with the broader cooperative identity to strengthen the co-op brand at the local level? And how can the campaign scale beyond Colorado, and what could it contribute to the broader co-op movement? As of now, we're really looking at the local needs and the local culture, the things that resonates with people here, and this broader state framework around the employee ownership. But it's our desire to make sure that we are not reinventing the wheel, that we are not proposing branding and visual identities and storytelling that is not aligned with the broader co-op movement, as we understand cooperatives to be a key component of community ownership. So our challenge and what I'm looking to learn in this symposium and also find collaborators is how we bring those things together and bridge this local project into the broader co-op movement. And our idea is that through this process, the goal of this project is for people to know when they see a co-op symbol, when they see those concepts, wherever they go, they understand, not from just a visual standpoint, but they understand those concepts, they understand their impact, they understand their concepts like economic democracy, workplace democracy. They understand concepts they're tied to local economic development, and how we can bring this to the broader population so we can pivot from a very niche sector in many respects to something that people are very familiar with and feel they belong to. So this is our main goal with the project. And like I said, I really welcome collaborations at this point. We have most of the infrastructure to be launching content, to be launching the storytelling aspect of this. There are still things within the framework that's worth refining, especially in terms of connecting this local initiative to the broader co-op movement. And with that, I really thank you the opportunity for sharing this, and can't wait to learn more through this process. Just watching Lisa's presentation, I already had so many ideas sparking. So I know this is going to be something that we witness throughout the remaining of the symposium. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia. You were a bit shorter on your presentation time, so let me just react with a question as I was listening to what you were saying, and knowing that this project that you're starting is focused on Colorado, but with that broader interest. So from your perspective, when you're thinking about media, storytelling, visual arts, and doing it with impact so that it leads to people understanding and engaging, do you have a sense of how localized that needs to be? Because you're talking at a state level in the United States, you're not even talking about the country. Lisa was talking about the country, and we know in the cooperative sector, we have this country by country distinctions, but how localized do you have a sense? Do things need to be to resonate, therefore have impact? Is it at state or even smaller? Is it like, how contextual is it from your perspective? That was going through my mind as I was thinking about you. Big question, perhaps I don't have the answer, but it's just something that I'm thinking about as we listen to these ideas at so many different scales, and knowing from my perspective that context is always also so important, and it breaks down in so many ways in human society. So any thoughts?
Absolutely. And I want to refer to our research that ICCM developed a couple of years ago on multi-stakeholder networks. That's definitely part of the lens here. We are starting at the local level because of this state infrastructure we have and this effort we have to make employee ownership more mainstream. But the idea is through this process to create collaborations and intercooperation among different co-op institutions, associations, federations within the US, connect with other efforts across different states in the US as well. There are other commissions, other centers, they're focused on similar subjects. And the idea is that we can scale through, keep its local roots, but in dialogue with those national associations and the global co-op movement, and make sure that we bring that coherence across the communication, that we are not dissociating from for example, the co-op visual identity that's adopted by the global movement, how we can bring that into our local reality and translate those concepts. So it starts very much rooted in our community, but the goal is to scale and be able, through those partnerships, through those collaborations, to bring more and more of what's happening at a larger scale. So people here are also aware that this is not something done by Colorado in isolation, but something that connects to other initiatives, that connects to other parts of this movement.
Thank you, Julia. And maybe a hot pursuit, because I can pick up on a comment that was just added in the chat where I think I know the answer that you will likely give to this. However, it's flagging not having heard social solidarity economy as a framing. And is there a reason for that? Just, I guess, is it inclusive of that or exclusive? Do you have any thoughts before we move on?
Yes, actually, one of our Colorado has been very intentional on developing the concept of social co-ops here, as it's already belongs to the broader movement, but is not something people are as familiar. We don't have like different from Italy, we don't have the format of social co-ops per se in the legislation, but there are groups here, including partners and vendors from the employee ownership office, that's very intentionally developing this framework here. Like I mentioned, the drivers co-op is being framed here in Colorado, is being framed as a social co-op. So that's also part of why we are framing these around broader community ownership, because we are embedding the social solidarity lens. We want to bring more intentional content on social co-ops. So because of also time of the presentation, we don't have time to really cover all the different aspects, because we want a broader campaign that will include not only worker co-ops, but intersection with social co-ops, with employee ownership beyond co-ops. So we are keeping the frame now relatively open and flexible, because we also want to see how those things develop, and instead of setting things in stone from the beginning, but it's definitely part of this campaign.
Thank you. And I don't have it at my fingertips, but Nicholas, if you do, the link to the global definition of social solidarity economy, or we can find it and post it. But just for those that isn't always terminology that is absolutely definitely not in the minds of the public, but I find a very useful framing of our values aligned types of organizations, including co-ops and beyond. So I think it's a really useful additional framework and framing of what we're including. And then with what Julia is working on as well, it even, I would say, goes beyond that when it's talking about the full spectrum of worker ownership, for instance. So there's all these things we have to think about, what we are part of and the broader ecosystem. So that's excellent. And I see Eric put a link that I'll be keen to click on as well about a sub-national level example in the state of Maine in the United States. So this is why the chat can be really useful, just as thoughts fire off of things that you're involved in that you think relate. We're all collectors here, and we're collecting our collective wisdom and insights. So that's wonderful. Now we're going to travel from Julia as a Brazilian based in the US to Brazil for a Brazilian to present. Well, I assume, Lucas, that you're a Brazilian in Brazil, to present on the organization of Brazilian cooperatives and what they've been doing for a number of years along these similar themes. So Somos Co-op, promoting co-op identity through shared branding. So please say more to introduce yourself, Lucas, and I turn it over to you to share your presentation.
Thank you so much, Karen. Yes, I am a Brazilian based in Brazil. I'm very glad to have another Brazilian on the panel. I'll share my screen in a second, and then I'll begin. Do you see the presentation?
All
Great.
good, yes.
Thank you. So, first of all, thank you so much for having me here to talk about our leading initiative in promoting co-op identity through a shared branding. And I do believe that it's going to have a lot of synergy with what Lisa and Julia have been talking about previously. And hopefully, I'll bring in some practical results that our initiative has brought in and that can maybe validate these strong frameworks that Lisa and Julia have been talking about previously. So first, I'll just introduce myself quickly. I am Lucas Badu. I am a graphic design analyst at the Organization of Brazilian Cooperatives, and we're going to talk about how we promote co-op identity through a shared branding, and that brand is Somos Co-op. In English, that would translate to "We are Co-op," and it's been uh, a strategy that an ongoing strategy to strengthen public perception of cooperatives here in Brazil. And first, I'd like to talk a little bit about what is the OCB system or the Organization of Brazilian Cooperatives. And as Karen mentioned in the beginning, we are a system that comprises over 4,000 cooperatives across 7 different segments, and that amounts to over 25 million associates. So the idea of having a shared brand that would represent such different realities across a big country like Brazil may seem daunting at first. And we we look to data to design a strategy, a consistent strategy that we have been developing over the years. So the first stepping point for us was a survey that we led in 2018, which was a survey of cooperative image, and it had several interesting findings. But one main takeaway that I would like to highlight is that only about 29% of the 11,000 people that were interviewed were able to name a cooperative when prompted. And that highlighted that public perception of cooperatives in 2018 was still very low. As Lisa also mentioned in her presentation, that in Canada, that seems to be the case as well. And our response to that as an organization that represents and defends the interests of cooperatives in Brazil was to start systematically working on a communications and marketing campaign in order to improve public perception. But for that campaign, we also didn't feel like using the OCB system brand was more effective because, as Liz also mentioned, it's an acronym that not a lot of people will have familiarity with and doesn't immediately communicate cooperative values. So we needed a brand in order to put this campaign for the society. And we looked to ICA, the International Cooperative Alliance, and their international cooperative marque for our starting point. We understood that adopting the cooperative mark also meant that we would become a part of a global movement and not only a local and singular experience. But we also needed to adapt this logo, this cooperative mark, to our context. Karen also mentioned that context is vital. And so we took the cooperative mark and we added the word somos, which means we are in English, and also the Brazilian flag as a symbol in order to uh, bring the mark closer to our Brazilian context. And then we have the logo, Somos Cop logo, that could be adopted by any cooperative in any sector, from agriculture to housing and infrastructure, and even more recently, now Brazilian also has insurance cooperatives. So then we had 2 different challenges. One of them was to actually uh, get cooperatives to adopt the Somos Coop brand and also introduce this brand to society. And that is how we started our work in 2018 with the launch of a manifesto video that meant to unify cooperatives and start up a dialogue with society. So just to have one clear message of how cooperatives provide positive aspects for society. Then we also provided for cooperatives a set of guidelines for the brand and a set of communication materials that they can then adopt and utilize and even adapt to their own context. So the Somos Coop brand is flexible to work with the branding of cooperatives. They can apply it in different colors and in different formats in order uh, to increase the acceptance rate of the brand. And we were happy to see that it did in fact take hold. So cooperatives everywhere in Brazil are adopting the Somos Coop mark in their product packaging, in clothing, in corporate signage, and many other different applications. So that being done, we started talking with society, and that culminated in our yearly campaigns that we hold every year to talk to society about cooperatives. So in 2020, our first national campaign went live, and it also counted with the presence of a famous Brazilian tennis player, Guga Kirten, who's pictured here. And every year we have this campaign and we adapt slightly the message of the campaign, but still keeping consistency with the branding and the message. So in 2020 and 2021, the message was to let's come be a co-op. Everything around you already is. And then in 2022, we were still working with the celebrity and we adapted the message slightly to show the size of cooperatives in Brazil and say that cooperatives do a lot and they do it well. That was the main tagline for the 2022 campaign. In 2023, we were no longer working with the tennis player, but we aim to emphasize real cooperatives. So we worked with real cooperative images, photographs, and trying to showcase diversity. And we invited society, let's cooperate. We were aiming to show that cooperatives are for everyone, those who want to sell, to buy, to work, and to prosper. In 2024, our campaign still showcased real cooperative photos, uh, but we were aiming to highlight the business dimension of cooperatives with the tagline, cooperatives are a good deal. And we were still also inviting the society to let's cooperate. And then in 2025, we aim to echo the theme of the International Year of Cooperatives, again, adapting it to our own context and to our own tone of voice. And the key message of this campaign became let's cooperate for a better world. And now we reach finally 2026, and this year we move into a much more action-focused strategy because we would like to highlight cooperative products and services with the message of transform your community, choose co-ops. And with this, we went beyond our previous campaigns and we provided several materials for co-ops to use as they are, or even to edit and adapt to their own context. For example, using their own product photos and making this content their own. Alongside our yearly campaigns, we also kept up a constant production of materials for social media and other platforms. So that includes ebooks that explain how cooperatives work, videos with famous influencers and other content creators, campaign ads, web series that shows how cooperatives work, and a constant updating of our official website, which is somos.coop.br. Um, and then I just wanted to quickly go through all of this quick summary of what we have produced. And you might be wondering what's next, what actual results came from this extensive work. And I'm glad to say that, again, cooperatives have been adopting the Somos Coop brand. And now we count with over 1,700 cops that use the Somos Coop brand either in their packaging or their communications materials or some other point of contact with consumers. And this shows that the co-ops see value in highlighting their cooperative identity. On the public perception side, we held a new survey of cooperative image in 2023, and we noticed that from 29% in 2018, in 2013, 2023, 55% of the respondents were now able to name a cooperative. So that That is a significant change from 2018 to 2023. And we have reason to believe that the Somos Co-op campaigns have played a major role in that, as well as the adoption of the brand by cooperatives countrywide. I also could not not mention that the International Year of Cooperatives played a major role in building momentum for the movement here in Brazil. And it even allowed us the opportunity of holding a national event where we gathered 800 cooperative communicators, so professionals from cooperatives that work in communication and marketing. And we were able to align strategies, present the national campaign for 2026, and just build community, which was very important because it highlighted that our strategy starts at the national office here in Brasilia, the capital of Brazil, but and the national office develops and distributes strategic roadmaps and materials for cooperatives. And then we also have the 27 regional offices that are based on every state in Brazil that take the content that created by the national office and adapt it to their own language, their own reality in their state, and then disseminates this content to the over 1900 members of our communications network, which is made up of professionals from cooperatives that are responsible for implementing these strategies. So, and how do they implement these strategies? We do have a hub of information and content, I'm just going to quickly talk about our latest campaign. For the launch that happened in March, we provided a few materials and asked cooperatives across the country to post at a specific time and date, and they could either use this material as is, or they could adapt to make it their own. And in only 24 hours, we noticed that over almost 300 posts were made, taking these materials and adapting it in different ways to make it make sense for each cooperative, but still keeping the key message intact and the key elements intact. And we also noticed that there were almost 4,000 interactions in comments, reactions, and sharing. I'm nearly reaching the end of the presentation here, but I would also like to highlight that our work with content creators is also constant and has been bringing incredible results, because in this campaign, again, in 24 hours of the campaign going live, we were working with two major celebrities in different fields here in Brazil, and we reached an incredible amount of accounts and had almost 1 million views in just 24 hours. So we are very aware that many consumers today care about sustainability and social impact, and we believe that cooperatives offer exactly that. And that is why this campaign, I'm just going to close this presentation with a spoiler of what's happening right now here in Brazil. That is that the Somos Co-op campaign is reaching supermarkets and stores across the country, and we created this project, and this is just a simulation, but right now it's going live in supermarkets and grocery stores and other points of contact everywhere. And we aimed with this to bridge the gap between cooperatives and their customers even further. And although I don't have concrete evidence of how the results are because they're still ongoing, I would like to invite everyone to follow OCB System and Somos Co-op on our social media channels in order to keep looking at how these projects are materializing and what sort of results we're having out of it. So that's all I had for today, and I would like to thank you once again for the time. And if there are any questions, I'll be at your service. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really fabulous. And I'm just going to again pause, but rather than fill the space, ask whether any of the other panelists have a question or comment to make on what Lucas just presented. Lisa, Julia, or Jason? Question or comment?
Oh, I'll just say, Lucas, it's Lisa from Canada. That was incredible. It is exactly what we would love to see in Canada and elsewhere. And yeah, I'm almost speechless. I was so excited to see everything that you showed and the progression and how much more, how the brands have adopted and incorporated it. It's I had no idea that there was an actual live example of something I dreamed about. So I'm just over the moon. I can't wait to chat with you more.
Yeah, for sure, we can talk about more of this experience, and it is really incredible for us as well. The reality of the situation is that in 2018 we had about, in 2020 we had about 800 cooperatives that we knew were using the brand, and to jump now to 2026 with over 1,700, that shows that the growth is rapid and that the strategies are working, that the cooperatives are embracing these movement. So to what Julia was saying, it becomes a cultural movement for cooperatives as well because they feel the belonging and they see the pride in using, especially when we say that the logo actually means we are co-op. So it shows the identity at the forefront. And so yeah, we are still monitoring constantly, and we are going to hold a new survey this year, a new cooperative identity survey, and we're very excited to have our new findings.
And I just want to mention that I posted in the chat, but I feel there's like a similarity with the approach that naturally happened with adding the Brazilian flag next to the co-op logo and the proposal in Canada to add Canada before the co-op logo. So it's something that could definitely be a merged or adopted similar strategy. I personally really liked the little Brazilian flag next to the co-op, but it just so naturally aligns with the proposal of having the national visual identity with the broader co-op logo, and I think this is brilliant.
For
Thank
sure,
you,
yeah,
Julia.
that was very important to our project.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I was then sort of looking up the Brazilian flag, and for non-Brazilian folks, you might not see that circle and think flag, so it appears to be more of a rendition or an interpretation of a part of it, but that would be a visual identity for Brazilians. Is that sort of the correct sense of what you've done with that circle on the end?
Yeah, it is an adaptation of the Brazilian flag, especially because it could also have some sort of political connotation that we wanted to avoid. So the Brazilian flag is represented here. It is more abstract than the actual Brazilian flag, but Brazilians will recognize it as the Brazilian flag either way. So yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, no, I think that's really an interesting question that all these contexts need to ask themselves, because as someone that's in Canada, we have a harder time with a Canadian identity that is recognized and felt by all Canadians, I would say, given just the context of Canada. And other countries may not have that same question about, well, do we have something that we could use at the end? And yeah, you're able to do that, which helps. And one thing I would bring up more generally for anyone of this group of presenters to comment on is I've always been intrigued by in the United States how the twin pines symbol is used. And for those that have come across the twin pines, one of the things I think in terms of the story behind it has always been hard to get much information. So it was created in 1922, came out through what is now the National Cooperative Business Association, NCBA CLUSA. But then you see it in some other countries, in particular because I believe, from what I've been told, the work of the CLUSA side, the international development. So for instance, when I go to Costa Rica, I drink milk from Dos Pinos, Twin Pines. So that's a symbol that you see in certain places, which I think is a question I have, say, if I was in the United States, is that the kind of symbol you would put at the end, or is there something else recognizable as the United States? So this question of symbols and appropriateness of them and how and whether to integrate them, I think is something worth spending some more time on when we connect across context. the very local, the regional, the national, the global. And yeah, and you have to come up with what works for you. So you've come up with what works in Brazil, and you've integrated the co-op, the sort of global marque approach in that, and that seems to have worked for you, where not all contexts may feel that that does. So I think it's just one of those things. And someone had said it in the chat, but it's so long ago I can't remember. It's more like something along the lines of, we need to have it be appropriate for the context, but we're also trying to build unification, across a global system. So how and where do you figure that out? Because it needs to be effective. There's no point all just doing the same thing if it doesn't get us any further ahead in terms of what the pursuit of this whole symposium is about, and what each of you are highlighting as we go through and with real examples. Jason, you've been quiet, but go ahead, Julia, before I also move on to Jason. So hopefully he's there.
I think it was Santosh from the ICA who mentioned the approach of harmonizing but without uniformity. And I think this is a really important question in the symposium, and tying to what I presented that starts at a more local level is how we create that visual identity that is harmonious across, the global movement, but without losing the touch and the identity of local communities. And we can, create that communication between local scale and broader global scale, and how we bring that all, we pack that into the visual identity. I think the Brazilian case does it really well.
Thank you, Julia. And thank you for remembering it was Santosh that had put that in the chat, because I know I read it and then I got it all wrong. So we're trying to harmonize, not create uniformity. And then Leire, thank you for adding the link about the history of the actual current global co-op marque. I think all of these pieces are important. We need to sort of understand so much to then figure out what makes sense going forward. So with that in mind, we're going to turn it over to Jason Weiner, and the title is Ownership Structures, Our Identity Structures, Cooperatives as Critical Institutions for Today's Economy. So we'll have even more to think about, and then we'll get into more open dialogue. So please do add specific questions in the chat. So over to you, Jason. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. And can you hear me and see the slides okay?
All perfect.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to take us home. We've been treating cultural problems like a communication problem. For decades, the cooperative movement has tried to solve its growth challenge by explaining governance better. More accessible bylaws, cleaner formation pathways, friendlier onboarding, and better socials. And it hasn't met the moment. Not because the explanations are bad, but because the explanation isn't what's missing. We've been trying to appeal to the head and not to the heart. What's missing is a cultural muscle group. Western capitalism has spent 2 centuries building rituals and vocabulary for individualism, for competition, for free markets, and for the accumulation of private wealth. We have a language for all of it. We have ceremonies, mythology, and a whole aesthetic, the lone founder in a garage, the self-made success, the bootstrap story. That mythology is wrong and harmful, but it is coherent. It hangs together. It gives people an identity, albeit a toxic one. The cooperative tradition has something more ancient, intuitive, relational, and more true. But we've let its rituals atrophy and its vocabulary go untranslated. We have, in too many rooms, tried to introduce cooperative economics by leading with governance documents, formation checklists, as though the problem were structural access rather than cultural imagination. What I want to argue today is the cooperative movement is not primarily a legal innovation or an equitable mechanism, though it is both of those things. It is a tradition. It's a set of cultural practices steeped in and urging us toward an altogether different economic system. One that is more within our grasp than we believe, not in spite of the wiring of Western capitalism, but because of it. Because the exhaustion is real, the hunger is real, the conditions for cultural reform are ripening in ways that haven't in a generation. But reform requires boldness, not incrementalism, not positioning ourselves as a niche alternative, but radical imagination about what the economy could actually be and the cultural courage to name it. Let me start with a claim I want you to sit with. Ownership structures are identity structures. When we design a business, we're not just deciding who gets profit distributions or who sits on the board. We're deciding in legally binding and economically enforceable terms who matters, who decides, and whose contribution generates wealth versus those whose contribution generates someone else's wealth. In conventional entity design, capital makes all those decisions. Capital influences every structural choice, from governance to economics, decision-making authority, and who the entity exists to serve. The entity does business on behalf of capital. It acts in the interest of capital. Everyone else, no matter how long they stayed, how much they built, how much of the crisis they solved, is at a core structural level instrumental. That's not a moral judgment. It's a description of what the documents say and how the system works. In a cooperative, a worker cooperative, member owners make those decisions. The entity exists on behalf of its member owners. It acts in their interests. Members are not inputs. They are not just labor. They are the stakeholders for whom the entire enterprise operates. It is fundamentally a different statement about who a person is in relation to their work. And right now, 3 groups are feeling the weight of the conventional model in ways that have no outlet, nowhere to go. The founder who can't sell. I work with founders who built something real from 20 to 55 years of culture, relationships, and community. When the transition comes, they find themselves staring at a private equity term sheet and feeling something that they can't name. And I can tell you what it is. It's the recognition that the structure they're being offered will honor their capital and erase everything else. The machinist who's been there 20 years, the office manager who's kept everything running, the customer relationships the whole company depends on. Private equity takes the financial asset and hollows out the social one, and the founder becomes the instrument and pariah of that extraction. I've watched founders walk away from perfectly good transactions, not because the terms were wrong, but because they finally asked, what am I doing here? Next, the worker who's done contributing to someone else's wealth. Contrary to the trope, Millennial and Gen Z workers are not lazy or entitled. They're capable people who have looked at the deal being offered, hard work, generate value, watch it accumulate to owners they'll never meet, and said, not forever, not me. They're not asking for charity. They're asking for a structure that reflects what's actually true. Their contribution builds value, and that value should, at least in part, accrue to them. That's not radical. That's accurate. That's human. Failing to acknowledge this innate desire is a failure to meet the moment and a failure of courage. And lastly, the community watching its institutions get hollowed out. You all know this story. Local business, generations deep, sold to a holding company. The name stays, the brand stays, the jobs for a while stay. Then quietly decisions start being made somewhere else, someone somewhere with no relationship to the community, to history, or to a stake in what happens when the plant closes or the hours get cut. 5 to 7 years later, the wealth that used to circulate locally starts flowing out, and the community is left with a faded logo where an institution used to be. These 3 groups are experiencing the same underlying crisis from different angles. The economy's identity structure is failing them, and they don't have the cultural vocabulary to name what they need instead, or to name the feeling. We have that vocabulary. The question is whether we're willing to deploy it as a vision for cultural transformation rather than a pitch for legal or economic structures. Before I get to what cooperatives offer, I need to name what's standing in the way, and it's not what most advocates focus on. It's not capital access, though that matters. It's not legal complexity, though we can do better. It's not a lack of awareness, and that's real. The deepest obstacle is a cultural one. Again, Western capitalism has built a comprehensive mythology of individualism, and the cooperative tradition has not built a comparably coherent mythology of collective achievement. Most founders I know didn't consciously choose the bootstrap myth. The mythology got there first and chose them. The self-made entrepreneur who needed no one, who owes nothing, whose sacrifices entitled them to every dollar, all that equity. It's a story told with such force and repetition that it becomes invisible. Most of us absorbed it before we had the language to question it. And here's what the story costs. It makes honoring the people who built alongside you feel optional rather than obligatory. It makes transition feel like defeat rather than completion. It strips the language of contribution, mutual obligation, and covenant, and replaces it with the language of the deal. Your business was never just a transaction. It was a covenant, even if no one in the room would have used that word. That is essentially what equity is, a promise toward the future. But here's what I want to say directly to you all. The answer to a bad mythology is not a better governance structure. The answer is a better mythology. That requires cultural work, not just legal work. Worker cooperatives are not just equitable mechanisms, they are a tradition, one with deep roots in labor history, religious communitarianism, in indigenous economic practices, in the Mondragon experiment, in the 14th century Florentine guilds, and in the Rochdale principles. The tradition contains rituals, vocabulary, practices, and a moral vision. It has ceremonies for welcoming new members and practices for navigating disagreement. It has a language for shared sacrifice and shared achievement that the bootstrap myth actively suppresses. And critically, these cultural practices don't belong only to cooperatives, though we wish they did. They can be implemented and practiced by any organization, any community, any team. When a conventional business creates genuine feedback loops, shares decision-making in practice rather than just in an org chart, and builds psychological safety, practices healthy tension rather than suppressing it, that business is training the cultural muscle. It's building the conditions in which cooperative identity can actually take root. And here's the thing about the cooperative movement that needs to be said loudly. Cooperatives don't just need better legal infrastructure. They need cultural conditions in which they can actually operate. Safety, real communication, feedback loops that function, power sharing that lives in practice and not only in bylaws, the capacity to hold tension productively rather than collapse into false harmony. These are not just soft prerequisites. They are the substance, the essence. A cooperative that lacks them is a conventional hierarchy wearing different documents. And conversely, every organization that builds these conditions, regardless of its legal structure, is doing cooperative cultural work, expanding the muscle group and making the movement's vision more legible and more real. So what does this call for practically? It calls for a different ambition that we have mostly not had. Not help more people understand cooperatives, not streamline formation, not improve messaging, though those things do matter. They are instrumental. The animating question has to be larger. How do you build the cultural muscle for collective achievement in an economy that has spent centuries atrophying it? And the numbers should trouble us more than they do. The ICA estimates that more than 1 billion cooperative members worldwide, of at least 12% of humanity. In the United States, electric cooperatives alone serve 42 million people across 2,500 counties. By any measure of scale, cooperation is not marginal, it's not emerging, it's not a promising experiment. It's already one of the most significant forms of economic organization on the planet. And yet it doesn't feel that way. Not to the worker choosing between employers, not to the founder designing an ownership structure, not to the policymaker deciding which economic model deserve infrastructure support. Cooperation has achieved scale without achieving cultural hegemony. That gap between the size of the movement and its legibility as a default rather than an alternative is the diagnostic. It is the central question. It tells us that the constraint is not structural, it is not legal, it is not economic, it's cultural. And the means to the solution have to be cultural as well. 3 things that I think would actually move the needle. 1, lead with the question and not the structure. We stop opening with, here's how a cooperative works, and we start by asking, what do you owe the people who built this with you? The question lands differently. It activates something. For the founder sitting with the private equity term sheet, it opens a door they didn't know was there. For the worker contributing without ownership, it names something they've been feeling for years without language for it. For the policymaker watching community wealth extract itself, it reframes the question entirely. The cooperative structure is the answer, but the question has to come first, and the question is cultural before it's legal. 2, name what is actually being transformed. In every conversation at some point, say explicitly what's happening. We are changing who this person is in this economy and in this structure, not just what they own, but who they are. The worker who becomes a member owner doesn't just receive a financial instrument, they receive a different relationship to their work, one where contribution and ownership are no longer severed. They take that their stake in the enterprise's success is not manufactured by an incentive program. It is structural and it is real. That changes how people work and how they communicate. It's not automatic. It requires the cultural conditions I described. A membership certificate does not create the cooperative identity. The practices do. The rituals do. The willingness to share power in the room, not just on paper. 3, claim and embody the radical imagination that the tradition deserves. The Rochdale pioneers didn't position themselves as a niche alternative to the convention of retail. The same is true for the Florentine trade guilds and the Andean communities building mutualistic trade networks. They were building a different economic system. Mondragon didn't frame itself as an incremental improvement on the Spanish labor market. It was a vision of how an entire regional economy could be organized around human dignity rather than capital accumulation. We have in recent decades gotten smaller in our ambition. We've learned to speak the language of impact investing and stakeholder capitalism, languages that make us legible to conventional capital, but also quietly domesticate us, further our internal colonization. The cooperative tradition is not a variation on capitalism. It is a challenge to capitalism's core identity claim that the person who brings the money is the person who matters. It says something different. It says that the person who shows up, who contributes, who builds, that person is the stakeholder for whom the entire system exists, not as a concession, but as an a priori principle. That's a bold claim, and it deserves to be made boldly, loudly, and consistently. I want to close with something that's become clear to me the longer I do this work. The cooperatives movement's most important contribution is not the legal structure. It is the proof of concept, the living demonstration, the thousands of enterprises across the world that the economy can be organized differently. That collective achievement is real and worth celebrating. That shared ownership doesn't just distribute wealth more equitably, it creates workplaces and institutions where people are more honest with each other, more invested in each other's success, more willing to do the hard relational work that every organization needs and most organizations avoid. That proof of concept is cultural infrastructure. It is, sorry about that. Let me get back to where I was. It is the thing that makes the mythology of collective achievement legible to people who have only ever lived inside the mythology of the individual achievement. But we don't get there through incrementalism, and we won't get there by making ourselves easier to understand or more palatable to conventional investors or less threatening to people who benefit from the current arrangement. We'll get there the way every cultural reformation has, by naming what's broken with enough clarity that people recognize their own experience in it, and by offering a vision compelling enough that they're willing to do the hard work of building something different. The exhaustion from the bootstrap myth is real. We have the tradition, we have the vocabulary, and we have the practices. The question is whether we have the boldness to embody them, not as a niche alternative, but as the answer, not as an incremental improvement, but as a different vision altogether of what the economy is for. That is the cultural work in front of us, and there has never been a better moment to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. There's been a lot to try to take in the last hour and a half. And I always appreciate the way you use language in your descriptions. So perhaps you see some of that in the chat as well coming across. And that's I want us to take advantage of these final 20 minutes or so, because I know Erin will need a few minutes at the end to close us off. So I would ask first of the other folks on the panel, well, all of you, do you have a question that you've been sitting on that you'd like to ask each other? So any of you to another, that being, of course, Lucas, Lisa, Julia, and Jason. Is there something you'd like to, an observation that would be cross-cutting, or a specific follow-up that you'd like to ask one of your fellow panelists?
I've got a question. In preparing my remarks, I was, reflecting and studying on some of the historical traditions upon which this work is based. And I'm curious what traditions and communities you all have been inspired by in developing some of the vision and strategies that you presented about today.
Great question. And perhaps I'll just say, I know we don't all see the faces in the same order. I'll just call on folks. And if you're not ready to speak, you can pass. So Lisa.
I'm still thinking about an answer. If someone on the if someone else, one of my colleagues has an answer before, please go ahead.
Julia, you unmuted. Jump in.
Yes. One part of this work that's been developed through the lab and the research we do is through uncovering governance ecologies and looking at less known experiences of collective governance and collective ownership across traditional communities. And we start looking at indigenous communities in Brazil, especially in the Amazon, and connecting with them and learning how they care their local economies. And no, they're not incorporated. Sometimes they are as co-ops, but not always. But in many respects, they are still operate very much like a cooperative. They have a collective taking their economies. That's who they are. That's what I love about the Somos Co-op. And that resonates a lot with this Brazilian social solidarity economy at large. A lot of local indigenous groups are incorporating their co-ops, but at the same time, whether or not they become an enterprise or adopt that enterprise model, they operate across different values. And that is so naturally embedded in their culture and the way they operate that I think that's kind of the goal you're describing and the mythology. We don't have to start from that enterprise model, that legal structure, but understand that this can very much be the cultural roots of people, and people find that belonging and understand how ancestral these traditions are, and part of this research is showed to, and I think that sometimes a flaw in how we communicate that mythology, especially with the history of co-op movement. I might be poking some bears here, but not the global movement didn't start with Rockdale, though it has a global significance and an importance through the principles. But I think it's also an importance to honor the different streams of development of co-op history in different parts of the globe, especially those traditions in the global south that have been practicing cooperation for a long time. And how do we learn that level of cultural embeddedness for us to communicate co-ops? Because that's what I believe co-ops truly are, way beyond a legal policy, enterprise model, a framework. It is that cultural practice. So that's been heavily inspired by those experiments. And I believe that's probably very entangled too with the framework of System OCB and the Brazilian experience. But that happens all over South America. We have talked with people in Ecuador, in Peru, in Mexico. And that is something that is very embedded in those cultures, and how we achieve that level of embeddedness as a global movement.
Thank you, Julia. Lisa or Lucas, you ready to jump in yet? Whoever unmutes first.
I can chime in quickly and more building on what Julia mentioned. Yes, we do have cooperatives here in Brazil, specifically in the North region, that came from traditional communities. And last year, we COP30 happened here in Brazil, right? And we were able to bring some of these cooperatives and some of their representatives to COP30 in order to showcase to the global stage how these cooperatives are generating income and causing social change in their communities. And that is one way where traditional peoples and well, tradition itself is kept alive in the Brazilian cooperative movement. And someone asked on the chat if we considered mythology and the roots of the movement when building the Somos Coop brand as well. And I'll take the opportunity to answer that right now because Somos Co-op brand is mainly concerned with how we would like cooperatives to be perceived by society today. So it does touch on the principles and it does serve as a way for cooperatives to assert their cooperative identity. But we do have other simultaneous projects going on who that are more concerned with preserving history, legacy, and all of that in the cooperative history. Cooperative culture is right now a very important topic for us here in the OCB system and as well as the corporate cultural heritage project that we worked on with the ICA for last year that was launched last year. So I think that there are some points of contact with what Jason has presented here.
Thank you. Lisa, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're CMC has a rich history, and I think in some sense we're at the beginning of this journey of how we talk to Canadians about cooperatives and how we unify. And I'll just refer to the Canadian context and the national research that we did. We're very pleased to see how Canadians feel that cooperatives are rooted in all of the things that Canadians are looking for right now and care about. So there are different facets to that story that we want to bring forward, and we want to talk. I guess to your point, less about the governance structure and less about how co-ops actually operate and talk about realistically how cooperatives are already in their communities and are already serving people in exactly the ways that people are needing and looking for, and it's finding ways to connect those dots for them and to see that cooperatives aren't an alternative business model. They are actually the economic strength of the community and the fabric of this country that's keeping it strong. So that's the kind of storytelling as well that we want to bring into this branding initiative that I've presented today.
Thank you all, and for Jason kicking off with a question, everyone else. There's quite a bit in the chat. A lot of it, I would say, is about how folks are really enjoying this session and the dialogue and the ideas, and there's a lot of love, and some people have to leave to go to work, which seems like unfortunate, but a reality in life. So I haven't captured a question yet in there. There's lots of observations, that I haven't pulled out. If someone does have a question that's easy to type in, please do. Or if there are other questions from among the folks I am looking at on the screen, Lisa, Julia, Lucas, Jason, please chime in again. I would just say, Jason, I want to go back and, just listen to a lot of the words, maybe slowing it down. Not that you spoke too quickly, but it's like there's a lot of, you have using words, but then each word has a story behind it. So you need to kind of re-listen. But what something I wrote down and put a highlight around was just some of the power in saying to ourselves concepts like why are we allowing ourselves to be domesticated? I feel like this in some ways is a safe space because you're getting a lot of positive reactions, but in the broader cooperative sector, some of what, and I know Mike Mercer made a comment that would link to this as well in the chat, but that we need to all unify ourselves within the sector in a way that we don't create what sometimes feels like having to get in line with being professional and corporate and adapt to blend in. And so when you said that, I was channeling that side of how I feel sometimes in the sector, we aren't standing strong enough as a sector in how we embrace and move forward. So I use the bad analogy of Superman and kryptonite. If you get it when I talk about some of the co-op principles of just how we need to get beyond that and start to be stronger and more united. So that's more of an observation that then others may have thoughts on it, but it definitely resonates. And I feel like this is a group that has that as common at the core, but I wouldn't say that I feel that that is our sector more broadly. So how do we get through to what I would say is like, what language do we use to get through to those that are actually in our tent already, but they don't seem to speak co-op? And I'm talking at this, deep level of really being able to maximize our power as a sector. So just you and anyone, but Jason, you were getting me thinking when you're talking about domestication and us need to speak. And Mike Mercer talking about, we have leadership where we're speaking the language of KPIs and profitability and all of the rest of it. So, it's almost like we're taking the wrong medicine and that's affecting our ability to be powerful in the sector. Just a thought. Jason, you're unmuted. You can respond to my ramblings on that.
No, this is the reflection that I've been going through. I think we show up to conversations, kind of reducing ourselves. We come across maybe with a lack of self-confidence about, what we're in a room with maybe other more quote unquote mainstream folks to do. And we assimilate to the frame and the norms around the dominant economic and cultural language. And so that's precisely what I was trying to trigger us to think about is, can we walk into a room with a completely different energy, with a different frame, and take some confidence and strength in knowing we have thousands of years of history, shared tradition. We have a network of billions of human beings that innately understand how to cooperate. We build communities and families along these traditions. And yet we somehow show up and subscribe to a 150-year-old concoction and say, these are the serious people in the room. And I don't think we have to be defensive about any of it. I think we have to show up and maybe just embody a different energy. I know that sounds maybe a little less quantitative, but I think that's a lot. That's a lot of how it starts. And I think that's what has generated so much interest and so much affinity is when folks can just kind of feel at ease and know that, they're talking to people that are speaking a language that is more innately understandable, that there's, no intimidation or power that's going to be wielded over them in a way that's harmful. That quickly settles people's nerves. And I find that it just takes repetition and intentionality.
And I want to add, like also, like you mentioned, embodiment, I'd say grounding, like as we discuss, branding and visual identity, those things are paramount because we want to bring that level of familiarity. That was the clarity, some of the words that we use today, clarity, familiarity, belonging. So when people start looking at and that repetition of seeing that symbol, understand what that means, that's very important. But as we discuss branding and identity, we should always re-ground that into the principles and the values. I think sometimes with the note of, sometimes we see some very large co-ops that seem to drift away from some of those principles. I think it's like always tie that identity to the values and principles of this movement and not let that just, be secondary or a second discussion. And I think it's like exactly in this intersection of visual identity, principles and values, and storytelling. That was something Jason that's also ties to the media project is like how we build that mythology and we communicate those stories and we tell it over and over again. So it's much more than a brand. People understand the heritage, understand the roots, understand the impact in the community, and that I think is where, you know, we energize truly the co-op identity.
I'll just speak to what I heard a little bit repeated today was meeting people where they're at. And any brand that's been successful has understood their market and understood what the customer-centric need is to be able to match it and deliver something that matches. You know, there's zero play between what the brand delivers and what they expect, and that's how you build a successful brand. And I think all of the important parts about cooperatives we know and we have, and they're solid and they've been talked about and put on display in different ways. And I think that the communication challenge is, what do we put first? You know, similar to building a packaging that is, you know, very small. You have a couple of seconds to reach someone with the right message and get them to turn the package around and upside down, and then maybe go to a website. And there's a communication hierarchy that we need to think about. And what's the first thing that we're going to communicate to reach that audience? And, you know, Jason talked about governance and, you know, the structure, and that's probably not the first thing that you want to throw out. So I think understanding that a communication hierarchy is needed, and that our focus needs to be customer centric, similar to how all brands and packaging are built, to say, where are you at and what do you need and how can I deliver that to you as part of a cooperative message? And then let me peel back the layers of the onion and give you more. And so maybe the cooperative values show up at layer 7, and I don't hit you at layer 1 with the 7 cooperative values, because as we saw in the Canadian context, in a situation of precarity, which is, I don't know if the institutions are going to be there. I don't know if the footing that I'm standing on is solid. That's where Canada is at, and that's the feeling of most Canadians. The delivery of a message about a cooperative story is not going to be the first thing that I need to hear. And so I think really understanding the market, understanding who you're talking to, and what's going to resonate most is what's going to propel cooperatives into the conversation.
Yeah, I would just like to add to Lisa's point that in order to meet people where they at, we need to actually listen to what our audience wants and needs, and going beyond what the cooperative needs, particular needs are, but the society and the actual audience consumers. Uh, so here at the OCB system, the campaigns that we, the campaigns that we, are you guys?
We're good.
I think my connection is a little spotty. But the campaigns that we lead every year here with Somos Coop, they are very data driven. So, for example, in 2024, when our campaign was aimed to uh, aim to emphasize the business structure of cooperatives. It was based on survey findings that people were not associating cooperatives with business models and more with other attributes like cooperation and unity. So that was our way to respond to that data and hopefully shift the perception of how society was viewing cooperatives at that time.
And this is the moment in a 2-hour session where things start to pick up speed, and we only have a couple minutes left as the chat starts to become more interesting. Oh gosh. But I will need to hand it over to Erin in a moment. So I'm just going to backpedal up to what was 6 minutes ago. Nicholas, who's been very active in the chat, who finding him on LinkedIn. He works for the Cooperative Development Foundation of Canada, which is one of the international development organizations working on co-ops. So he's presently in Ghana in Africa, reviewing cooperative bills. You can read what he says there in terms of thinking about the bill and bylaws could refer to ancestral Adinkra symbols who teach about traditional wisdom of cooperation so that co-op members can see cooperatives as modern manifestations of ancestral practices and not as importations from the West. There must be other ways to communicate this ancestral cooperative culture through national education programs, social media posts, asking for our ideas. I think in some ways, Nicholas understands that those are good ideas that he's working on now, and some of what's been reinforced in some of the comments. But anything specific that you might point him to, and I know he's already provided, email address and LinkedIn, and that's part of this, right? Sharing with each other and then getting in touch to do follow up and continue sharing. But anything that based on the context he's in and what he's working on that you would throw into the mix now, and then we'll close and want to have hours more together, which I would say we can find time to be in person. If we all find that we have so many spaces and places that we could meet up and continue this conversation. But Jason, Lisa, Julia, or Lucas, any little words of wisdom? And you put it in the chat too if we start to run short on time of vocalizing it. And I encourage others to as well.
Well, just want to thank for the opportunity, and I think it was an interesting mix in this panel, and I think they all kind of tied together so beautifully. And I just reinforced the invitation for collaboration, and I very much want to learn more into how to communicate those things and how to create that mythology, how to bring the visual identity in a way that connects to the global movement. And I just look forward to keep in touch with all of you.
Thank you, Julia.
I'll just say I was really inspired by the presentations, and I'm actually glad that my conceptual presentation was preceded by Lucas's actual in market real presentation, which I was thrilled to see. So I think it really, the sessions really built well on each other, and I look forward to connecting with all of you and learning from you. So thank you for your talks today, and Karen for moderating us and keeping us honest.
I try my best. Jason or Lucas, a final word?
I just want to thank all of you for a really invigorating panel, and for having me, Erin and Karen. This was really, really a wonderful opportunity. It's inspiring to see so much strategic thinking, so much boldness. It's a breath of fresh air to see folks in the cooperative sector really getting out there to win, and not just kind of have a foot holding the door open. And, I think I'll just kind of zoom one more time back out and say, cooperatives are, for me, a container that create the pathways for thriving human connection. And so, if we act boldly, say things loudly, it's not a win in and of itself for there to be more cooperatives. It's what they provide for human flourishing, for community flourishing. It's just invigorating to see so much boldness. So thank you all for the work you're doing in your communities.
Lucas, you get the final word.
Yeah, I suppose I'll close this off by echoing what our other members of the panel have already said. This has been a very enriching experience, and I'm very glad to see that what we're doing with Somos Co-op is also naturally also happening in other places such as Canada, and also that there are movements in order to reach cultural significance as well as with what Julia is working on. And also keeping the history and the mythology of cooperatives alive, as Jason has mentioned. So I'll just say thank you once again. And if you guys want to learn more about the Brazilian experience, I will be at your disposal. Thank you very much.
Over
Great.
to you, Erin.
I mean, thank you so much to all of you. I am vigorously taking notes. I'm going to need a co-op to buy more pens. So I just want to say thank you to all of you. Thank you for challenging the zeitgeist. It's wonderful to approach things with such energy, and that's what we need. We know what's good. Sometimes we talk to ourselves too much. It feels like there's a real call to action to be, you can't have a movement unless you're bringing other people in, right? So I just really appreciate the very innovative work that folks are doing and challenging how we've been doing things with the best of intentions, but we need some new approaches. So this is what we wanted from this event, and I'm sort of pinching myself that this morning has gone the way it has so far, and today has gone the way it has. So thank you for your time and insights and the work that you do behind the scenes that aren't captured in a 20-minute segment.